In the spring of 1097, a massive Crusader army stood before the walls of Nicaea, the capital of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rûm. Now, this was their first real test, a huge, formidable fortress that they absolutely had to take if they were ever going to reach Jerusalem. Their victory here would really set the tone for the entire First Crusade. So how on earth did they pull it off? Let's dive in and find out. To really get the scale of what they accomplished, you have to know what happened right on this very spot just 7 months earlier. The so-called People's Crusade, this disorganized, badly equipped first wave, had been completely and utterly wiped out by the Seljuk Sultan Khalid Arslan. The fields all around Nicaea were, and I mean this literally, a Crusader graveyard. So this wasn't just a fortress. For them, it was a place haunted by a recent catastrophic defeat.
And that brings us to the big question, right? How did this new army, the Prince's Crusade, succeed where the first one was so brutally crushed? I mean, the fortress was the same, the defenders were the same, so what changed? Well, the answer is in this powerful combination of factors that all came together at the perfect moment.
To figure this out, we're going to break their victory down into its key ingredients. First, we're going to look at the sheer scale of the challenge they were facing, the fortress of Nicaea itself. Then, we'll get into the 3 crucial elements of their success: the incredible power of their faith, the quality of their leadership and imperial strategy, and of course, the deep divisions among their enemies. And finally, we'll see how it all mixed together to create their formula for victory.
All right, so let's start with the target. Nicaea wasn't just some city with a wall around it. No, this was one of the most heavily fortified strongholds in the entire world at the time. Taking it was thought to be, well, pretty much impossible.
Just look at this setup. It's a multi-layered defensive nightmare. You've got a massive lake, making any attack from the west completely impossible. The other 3 sides, protected by a deep, water-filled moat and these towering walls. And, sitting on top of those walls, over 300 towers, each positioned so their ballista, which are like giant city-killing crossbows, created these deadly overlapping fields of fire. Just trying to get close to these walls was basically a suicide mission.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Listen to the awe in the voice of Count Stephen of Blois, writing a letter home to his wife. You can just feel him shaking his head in amazement at what they were up against. 300 high towers, wondrous walls, bold fighters. He knew this was a monumental task, maybe even an impossible one. So you've got this impossible fortress. How do you motivate an army to even try to attack it? Well, this is where our first key factor comes into play: religious faith. And for the Crusaders, this wasn't some abstract idea. It was a tangible force on the battlefield. It was a weapon. This account from the Gesta Francorum, an anonymous chronicle from the Crusade, just sums it up perfectly. That sign of the cross wasn't just a symbol on a banner. It was like spiritual armor. It fueled this belief that they were divinely protected, that God was on their side. And that let them fight with a ferocity that could overcome incredible odds, which is exactly what they did when the first Turkish relief force tried to smash their camp. But, and this is a big but, this intense religious zeal had a much darker and, frankly, a brutally effective side to it. It became the justification for a campaign of psychological terror. After they beat that relief army, the Crusaders didn't just celebrate. They went about systematically decapitating the enemy dead. Then they loaded the severed heads into their siege engines and launched them, hundreds of them, over the walls and into Nicaea. As one of their leaders wrote, it was a joyful spectacle for the people of God. This wasn't just brutality for brutality's sake. It was a calculated act of terror, fueled by religious certainty, and it was designed to shatter the will of everyone inside those walls. Zeal alone gets you killed, right? The People's Crusade had already proven that. What made this army different? What made it work was its leadership. And that's our second key factor. This was a powerful combination of experienced Crusader commanders and, you guessed it, the strategic genius of the Byzantine Emperor. I mean, the contrast here is just night and day. On one side, the People's Crusade, a poorly supplied, ill-disciplined mob led by charismatic preachers. On the other, the Prince's Crusade, bankrolled by Europe's most powerful nobles, commanded by battle-hardened warriors like Godfrey of Bouillon and Bohemond of Toronto, and their arrival was actually planned for and supported by the Byzantines. Discipline and experience completely replaced chaotic enthusiasm. And at the very heart of all that planning was one man, the Byzantine Emperor, Alexios I. And it is no exaggeration to say that without him, the siege would have failed, period. He was the strategic architect of the entire operation.
Alexios's role here was absolutely critical. He used this clever mix of diplomacy, bribes, and, crucially, control of the food supply to get the Crusader lords to swear loyalty to him. But even more importantly, he kept their massive army fed. He prevented the starvation and desperation that destroyed the first wave. He gave them guides, equipment, and, this is the big one, the master plan. Without Alexios, this whole thing was doomed from the start. And what a plan it was. Just brilliant. While the Crusaders were busy besieging the city by land and fighting off that relief army, Alexios was pulling off a logistical masterpiece. He had his troops haul ships overland and secretly launch them onto the lake behind the city. I mean, can you imagine? This single move completely severed Nicaea's last supply route. The city was now completely surrounded. So, the Crusaders were up against a massive fortress, but they weren't facing a united enemy. And that brings us to our third and final factor, the state of the opposition. The Muslim world at this time was deeply fractured, and that created the perfect opening for the Crusaders. The Seljuk Sultan, Kilij Arslan, made a strategic blunder of epic proportions. And it was all born from overconfidence. See, after he so easily destroyed the People's Crusade, he just didn't believe this new army was a real threat. He figured they were another rabble. So when the Prince's Crusade showed up at Nicaea, where was the Sultan and his main army? Hundreds of miles away in eastern Anatolia, fighting a civil war against his Muslim rivals. This fatal miscalculation left the garrison of his own capital totally isolated. By the time Kilij Arslan realized his colossal mistake and rushed back, it was too late. He couldn't coordinate a proper attack. His relief force arrived disorganized, in pieces, and, as this quote shows, it got decisively smashed by the now dug-in and well-led Crusader army. The disunity of his world had cost him everything. Okay, so now we can really see how all the pieces fit together. You've got a fanatically motivated army, you've got brilliant leadership, and you've got a divided enemy. At Nicaea, these three things combine to create a perfect storm. The climax, the final blow, came one morning when the defenders of Nicaea looked out at their lake, their one safe lifeline, their escape route, and they saw a Byzantine fleet sailing towards them. They were cut off, completely and utterly. The psychological shock must have been immense. You have the brutal siege on land, the relief army defeated, and now this impossible fleet on the lake. It just broke their will to fight. So here it is, the formula for victory at Nicaea, all laid out. Religious zeal kept the Crusaders fighting through hell, and it terrified their enemies. Superb leadership and Byzantine strategy provided the food, the equipment, and the decisive winning move. And Muslim disunity left the city vulnerable and impossible to reinforce. Every single one of these factors was essential. Take any one of them away, and the siege almost certainly would have failed. And in a final move that just screams of the emperor's masterful control of this whole situation, the city didn't surrender to the Crusaders, who'd been bleeding and dying outside its walls for weeks. Nope. The garrison negotiated a secret surrender directly with Alexios's general. The Byzantines took control, a move that secured the city for the empire but planted some serious seeds of distrust with their Crusader allies. The conquest of Nicaea was a stunning, vital first victory. It proved that this combination of Western zeal, Byzantine strategy, and Muslim division was an incredibly powerful formula for success. But it was also a fragile one. The alliance was already full of tension, and their enemies were not going to stay divided forever. The real question was, could this winning formula actually hold together all the way to the Holy City?